Hello, everyone. Now, I know that it's hard to keep up on top of what's going on in the Holy Land, but if you want to know more about what's happening here in Israel, I'm Aaron Porras, and this is the Weekly Review.
A mother and her 3 children were killed, and over 50 others, mostly children, were injured in a tragic crash between a bus and several vehicles in the Galilee region in the north of Israel on Wednesday. As they're returning home from the end of the Sukkot holiday Wednesday afternoon, a bus carrying dozens of children in the Bnei Akiva youth movement collided with several vehicles, leaving at least 5 people dead. According to initial reports, the bus veered off course, hitting a van and a cab before flipping over onto its side. Magen David Adom said that 4 people inside the car were pronounced dead at the scene. 35-year-old Moran Ben Eli, along with her 3 children, Dekel, Liam, and Anael, ages 15, 11, and 5. Their husband and father, Reuven, who was also in the car, is hospitalized in serious condition. He regained consciousness Thursday morning and was told the devastating news of his family's death. The 5th casualty was found crushed underneath the bus and also pronounced dead. He was later identified as the bus driver, 76-year-old Asher Basson. Additionally, an 11-year-old girl and another boy are hospitalized in critical condition, and dozens more are in light to moderate condition. Countless emergency response units, including those of Magen David Adom, Fire and Rescue Services, and United Hatzalah, were called to the scene to tend to the victims. And IDF medical workers and Israeli Air Force helicopters were also brought in to assist in the evacuation of injured to hospitals. Police are still investigating the cause of the accident, as it still remains unclear what caused the bus to swerve out of its lane. Prime Minister Naftali Bennett also addressed the crash upon his return home from New York and spoke to authorities at the scene. Quote, "The heart breaks in light of the images from the difficult crash in the Upper Galilee. I ask to send my condolences from the bottom of my heart and a big hug to the families of those killed during this difficult time. The people of Israel are praying for the recovery of the victims," the Prime Minister said in a statement. He also called on the Israeli public to exercise extra caution and to drive safely and carefully. As tensions continue to escalate, a Palestinian terrorist was shot and killed Thursday morning after she attempted to stab police officers in the Old City of Jerusalem. According to the police, the woman exited the chain gate from the Temple Mount, pulled out a knife, and attempted to stab several officers standing in the vicinity. The officers, in response, opened fire, killing her. None of the policemen were injured. She was later identified as a 30-year-old resident of the town of Kabatia near Jenin in the West Bank. Also on Thursday morning, a Palestinian Islamic Jihad terrorist was killed after firing at Israeli security forces in the village of Bulkin, also near Jenin. The incident took place as Israeli forces conducted a nightly raid to arrest suspected terrorists. During the operation, clashes broke out, and the Palestinian, identified as 22-year-old Ala Nasser Zayud of the Al-Quds Brigades, the military wing of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad terrorist group, was shot and killed after he opened fire on the Israeli forces. His weapon, a machine gun, was confiscated. Earlier this week, 5 Palestinians were killed and 2 Israeli soldiers severely wounded in clashes in the Jenin area. Israeli security forces have been carrying out a series of raids in the West Bank designed to put a stop to Hamas terrorist cell activities that Israeli authorities have said were planning to carry out terrorist attacks on Israeli citizens and civilians.
It's been a whirlwind weekend at the United Nations in New York, the General Assembly meeting for wave after wave of leaders' addresses, and Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas delivering his speech on Friday, complete with dire deadlines and warnings.
وفي حال مواصلة سلطات الاحتلال الإسرائيلي لتكريس واقع الدولة العنصرية الواحدة كما يجري اليوم، فإن شعبنا الفلسطيني والعالم بأسره لن يقبل بذلك، وستفرض المعطيات والتطورات على الأرض الحقوق السياسية الكاملة والمتساوية للجميع على أرض فلسطين التاريخية في دولة واحدة. وفي كل الأحوال على إسرائيل أن تختار. هذه هي الخيارات أمامها وعليها أن تختار.
Speaking via video link with a long since debunked series of maps in the background, Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas once again repudiating Israel and calling for 2-state negotiations to resume at once, unless Israel wants to absorb the Palestinian population as well as all the disputed territories. But the call for diplomacy followed with a heavy precondition, Abbas giving Israel 1 year to negotiate a withdrawal to the 1967 armistice lines, including from East Jerusalem, or else the PA will rescind its recognition of Israel.
أمام سلطات الاحتلال الإسرائيلي عام واحد لتنسحب من الأراضي الفلسطينية المحتلة منذ عام 67 بما فيها القدس الشرقية، ونحن على استعداد للعمل خلال هذا العام على ترسيم الحدود وإنهاء جميع قضايا الوضع النهائي تحت رعاية اللجنة الرباعية الدولية وفق قرارات الشرعية الدولية. وفي حال عدم تحقيق ذلك، لماذا يبقى الاعتراف بإسرائيل قائما على أساس حدود عام 67؟ لماذا يبقى هذا الاعتراف؟
Abbas's threats seemingly falling on deaf ears, though. Abbas is becoming increasingly unpopular among his own constituency, and Israeli authorities are calling Abbas on his bluff. Defense Minister Gantz, for one, commending the call for political solutions, but saying that with this ultimatum, Abbas has climbed a tall tree that will be difficult to climb down from, adding that it's important to remember that no one is going anywhere and that we must deal in reality. Meanwhile, in said reality, Israel celebrating and expanding its partnerships across the region and the world. New reports showing that Foreign Minister Yair Lapid held multiple secret meetings with Jordanian leadership over the past month, and the United States approving of $1 billion in Iron Dome aid, practically overnight and with an overwhelming majority of bipartisan support. Prime Minister Naftali Bennett among the many thanking the United States for their partnership ahead of his own speech at the UN scheduled for Monday.
אני יוצא עכשיו לעצרת הכללית של האומות המאוחדות. זאת במה בינלאומית חשובה, ואני מאוד שמח על ההזדמנות להביא את הקול של ישראל, של הישראלים, באותה במה חשובה. זאת הזדמנות לספר את הסיפור שלנו על המקום של ישראל במרחב, על הרוח המיוחדת של הישראלים ועל התרומה שלנו לעולם. בזמן האחרון היו כמה רגעים חשובים, בראשם הניצחון הגורף בהצבעה בבית הנבחרים האמריקנים. אנחנו ראינו שברגע האמת נציגי העם האמריקני תומכים תמיכה גורפת 420 מול 9 בישראל באותה הצבעה על החימוש מחדש של כיפת הברזל. יש קבוצה קטנה אנטי-ישראלית שעושה הרבה רעש, אבל החבר'ה האלה נכשלו. תראו, אנחנו לא מגדירים את עצמנו לפי אחרים, לא לפי איראן ולא הפלסטינים. בכלל אני מציע למנהיגים שלהם לעסוק באנשים שלהם, בשיפור המצב שלהם, ולהפסיק באובססיה הזאת למדינת ישראל.
Foreign Minister Yair Lapid arrived in Bahrain on Thursday in the highest-level official Israeli visit to the kingdom since the countries established formal relations last year. Lapid landed in the country on an Israel plane with an olive branch painted on it. While there, he sat down for a meeting with Bahrain's crown prince in the first public sit-down. Lapid was invited to the kingdom by his Bahraini counterpart to inaugurate Israel's embassy in Manama. Additionally, the two countries will sign a series of bilateral agreements during the visit. The historic visit follows Prime Minister Naftali Bennett's meeting with Bahrain and United Arab Emirates ministers in New York on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly this past week. This was the first such meeting since he took office in June.
Folks, I'm so very happy to meet you. It's I felt it's important that we meet after to signal the year of the Abraham Accords, which, from our perspective, is very meaningful. It's first of all, I want to tell you that I met the King of Jordan and the President of Egypt, and they're of course delighted with the ensuing relationship between our countries, and I think I want to assure you of continuity. We're stable and we believe in this relationship, and we want to expand it as much as possible.
Meanwhile, also making history on Thursday, the first direct commercial flight from Bahrain landed in Israel. Gulf Air touched down at Ben Gurion Airport at around 1 p.m. local time, departing from the capital of Manama. The new route takes a little under 3 hours and will now operate twice a week. The plane was received with a traditional watery welcome. In coronavirus news, Israel continues to see signs that the fourth wave of the coronavirus is subsiding, just as Israeli children return to school on Thursday morning after nearly a month's hiatus due to Jewish holidays. Let's take a look at the report. On Thursday morning, some 2 million Israeli pupils returned to the classrooms, but not before taking a home rapid antigen test the night before. According to the health ministry, some 1.4 million antigen tests were picked up by families from Magen David Adom, with more than 90% of children eventually undergoing home testing before returning to school. Teachers and principals were ordered not to allow children in without a signed declaration from parents that they had conducted the test. Currently, if a student tests positive for COVID-19, this forces all classmates into a minimum of 1 week quarantine. Though a new pilot program, which is set to launch in 300 classrooms, will swap quarantine with daily coronavirus testing for 1 week. If successful, the pilot program will expand to all schools. Meanwhile, some 100,000 students remain in quarantine. And on Sunday, new Green Pass policy changes will take effect. Under the new guidelines, Green Passes will expire unless citizens receive vaccine booster shots 6 months after their second doses. But that means that more than 1 million Israelis will lose their passes overnight on Sunday, and among them almost half of the nation's educators. It remains unclear what will happen with schools then. Additionally, N12 Hebrew News Channel reported Wednesday night that anyone without a green pass will now also have to go into quarantine if exposed to an infected person, also calling into question the impact on Israel's economy. In light of all these questions, the coronavirus cabinet is set to meet on Sunday after a months-long hiatus. This as the health ministry reported a decline in serious cases on Thursday morning. According to the ministry, there are 639 patients in serious condition, and of those, 94% are not vaccinated at all, while 6% are fully vaccinated with all 3 doses. Additionally, some 3,550 new cases were diagnosed Wednesday, with a 3.6% rate of infection, and with the reproduction rate, or R, continuing to drop to 0.72. The ministry also announced that over 3 million Israelis have received the 3rd dose of the vaccine. While this is seemingly good news, there are population groups in Israel that are lagging behind, mainly in the Arab population, where vaccination rates are extremely low. Currently, some 50 Arab towns are red zones, according to the traffic light system. Prime Minister Naftali Bennett reiterated this past week that the focus should be on efforts to vaccinate the Arab and other population groups, and not on introducing new restrictions to the Israeli public, as suggested by health officials, whom he derided in a series of comments. And so now, with tensions running high, the cabinet will have to decide on Israel's future strategy in dealing with the pandemic.
Moving on, the Israeli Defense Forces seemingly working overtime in recent weeks. 5 terrorists linked to a Hamas terror cell in the West Bank killed in a large-scale arrest raid conducted by the Duvdevan Counter-terrorism unit and the Israeli Border Police. And Prime Minister Bennett praising security forces for foiling what apparently could have been an imminent terror attack being planned by the cell. Here with the details, ILTV reporter Asaf Nissan. Asaf, thanks so much for joining us. Now, what happened during this raid?
First of all, Aaron, great as always to be here. What we heard overnight were 2 areas, pretty much the major Jenin area and the major Hamad area. Both of them were targeted by the IDF, by the Duvdevan unit and the border police itself. They were on the fact that it turns out there's a terrorist cell there, not only a small one, but a very well-infrastructured Hamas terrorist cell that's been orchestrated and built throughout the last year. Now, this was actually part of the work Israel was trying to prevent with Operation Weed Whacking. In other names, pretty much. Yeah.
All right.
And overall, I mean, you see there was a successful operation trying to root out all of Hamas's terror infrastructure. But from what they found, especially recently, it's still a wide and strong infrastructure, which is hard to pretty much take out in a single strike. This is going to be a long and over-expected operation. And I'm seeing this continuing for the next few weeks at least.
What are some of the reactions that you're seeing in the West Bank to these raids and to the assassination, you could call it, of these Hamas operatives?
Well, the responses are not coming from the West Bank per se, much more from the south. We're seeing Hamas and the PIJ, which actually apparently, according to recent reports, one of those who died is actually part of the PIJ. So exactly, both organizations are talking about retaliation against Israel. With Hamas, we're expecting, of course, rockets, and with the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, we're expecting rockets. But the more illuminating and scary response was from PIJ saying, dark days await Israel. So it's pretty much funny to say that we're expecting more response from Hamas, but then again, the PIJ has been known to be very rogue and very hard forthcoming responses.
We know that they were very active with the previous war.
Exactly.
Operation Protective Edge. Now, it's been 100 days plus since the establishment of the Bennett-Lapid government. Do we see a difference in the way that they've been operating against terror in the West Bank, against Gaza, et cetera, as opposed to the Netanyahu government?
So far, I would say the new government has done a good job. Again, there is the issue that we have the same defense minister in both administrations, especially in the last two. But then
leadership makes a difference.
Then again, yeah. When you had Netanyahu, it's one hand, and of course, Ben's on the other. But we're seeing in the last 100 days a lot of pros and cons in each, and especially in the Bennett government, dealing with the escape of the prisoners from Kiryat Gilboa, which cost the taxpayers a lot of money on the one hand. But then again, you have Operation Guardian of the Walls, and of course, all the recent attacks and foiled attempts by...
To be fair, at least with the Gilboa escape, it looks like they've been working on that tunnel for a lot longer than Bennett's been in office.
Well, that's true.
but we'll put that aside. Asaf, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Now, speaking of international relations, United States President Biden's National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan heading to Cairo Wednesday for continued talks regarding Israel-Hamas ceasefire negotiations and a general spike in political tensions across the region. Regional relations appearing to be looking up, and the United States is praising Egyptian leadership for its recent help in maintaining stability, particularly through cooperations with Israel, like hosting Prime Minister Bennett in the Sinai earlier this month and brokering ongoing ceasefire negotiations between Israel and Hamas terrorists in Gaza. But the Biden administration not entirely pleased with the North African Arab nation, and White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan now arriving in Cairo to apply pressure on the El-Sisi government. This after also withholding nearly half of the United States' $300 million in military aid to Egypt, with the State Department explaining that the remaining funds would be released if Egypt addresses specific human rights-related conditions, like its crackdown on political dissent. Egypt, on the other hand, primarily looking to gain the United States' favor in its Nile River Dam dispute opposite Ethiopia. Ethiopia is saying that the dam is necessary for its economic growth, and Egypt is arguing that the dam would destroy its economy while threatening to use any means to stop it. Meanwhile, with respect to Hamas and Israel, nearly 5 months have now passed since the most recent war between them, and the shaky ceasefire barely holding on. Hamas operatives still planning massive terror attacks against Israel, with the IDF preventing them at the last minute during high-profile raids earlier this week, and Israel still limiting the amount of reconstruction aid, like steel and cement, that's allowed to enter Gaza, as it's often abused by Hamas to build weapons or otherwise wage attacks. Some aid allowed, though, including $20 million of Qatari funding that was let through earlier this month, and $50 million more that's set to come in October, earmarked for rebuilding homes. Now, for our last story tonight, a major mystery potentially solved. Israeli researchers finally discovering why the Dead Sea Scrolls were found where they were in the caves around Qumran. And it's all thanks to researchers at Ben-Gurion University who put the puzzle together using an ancient Hebrew document that was hidden in Cairo some 1,000 years ago. We're here to expand. Lead researcher in the discovery, expert in ancient Semitic languages, archaeologist, biblical researcher, and lecturer at both the Israel Museum of Jerusalem and Ben-Gurion University, Dr. Daniel Weinstub. Thank you so much for joining us, Doctor. Now, why were the scrolls stashed in Qumran? What is the theory that you've kind of unearthed here?
Hi, Shalom. Well, we already knew before my investigation that the many scrolls, not all of them, of course, were brought to the site from many different places all over the country, thanks to chemical analysis of the scrolls. But now we know, it's my opinion at least, how it happened, because any year at time of Shavuot, that is about May, all and every one of the members of all the communities scattered all over the country, conforming to the sect, was obliged to gather in one single place for participate in a special ceremony. The renewal of the covenant the bridge between God and any and each member of the sect. That is a very special and unique feature of this sect, unknown in any other Jewish group of philosophy. As you know, we the Jews make the covenant with God at time of the circumcision, the Brit Milah.
Right.
Yes, but this group needed to renew this covenant every year.
So do you have, what evidence did you find to support, that Qumran was used for this massive pilgrimage?
The two main points of my investigation are, first, that the impressive infrastructure of Qumran, with its enormous ritual bath, the mikvaot, and water reservoirs, fits exactly the needs for this one time a year gathering of 3 or more thousand of people for a few days. And second, I claim that one of the Qumranic documents, one of the most amazing of them, the Damascus document, or in Hebrew, Brit Damesek, contains the rule with the regulation of this annual gathering, and they also fit the archaeological data. So all the evidences leads to the conclusion that the main goal of the site was to hold this impressive annual gathering for all the communities conforming the sect for a few days.
So why were the Dead Sea Scrolls left behind in these caves, though?
What behind? Behind what?
Yeah, the Dead Sea Scrolls. Why were they left behind in the caves of Qumran?
Yes. And it seems that in this occasion, they bring and take scrolls to and from Qumran. They study, learn, and discuss internal issues of the set, etc. So the scrolls came and were taken from Qumran. That is the explanation.
Dr. Weintraub, if you could join us again in the future to discuss this a little bit further, I would love that. Thank you so much for joining us for today.
Okay, thank you.
And that's it for ILTV's Weekly Review. I'm Aaron Porras. See you next week.